Okay, in the final part of making your own picture frame, we are going to cut a spline groove in this spline jig, and then we're going to cut perfect blade width splines to slide in, glue in, and to make the corners of our miter joints extra decorative and extra strong. So how do you cut that groove? Well, say hello to the spline jig. The job of the spline jig is to hold your picture frame at a 45-degree angle to the table saw, with the point of one corner facing down, so that as you slide it through the saw, it cuts a groove perpendicular to your miter joint. The first question to ask is, how deep is that groove going to be? And we want ours to be 3/8 of an inch. So wiggle the spline jig onto the saw blade until the teeth of it poke through the groove that's there already. And then adjust the height of the blade until it is 3/8 of an inch up from where these two sloping faces of the jig come together. And if it's not exactly 3/8, don't worry, just make sure that it's less than half an inch, or we might not have enough material when we cut our splines. Then scoot the fence over until it supports the jig and allows it to slide along the fence and over the blade in that groove. And the groove itself is not the important part. There could be a huge groove from lots of different projects going through this jig. What is important, and what you need to imagine and ask yourself, is where is my picture frame going to be as it rides along on the jig and passes over the blade? You sort of want the blade centered on your picture frame, so when setting the fence, just get the jig out of your way and bring the frame itself down to the blade and ask, do I like where the blade is at this fence setting? If so, then you should be good to go. Make sure your jig is off the blade when you power it up. Load your picture frame into the jig and then push everything together with your frame tight to the fence over the blade. And then check your first groove. There's not much to measure here. It's going to be the thickness of the blade, called the kerf of the blade. And as long as it's about 3/8 of an inch deep, you should be a-okay to cut the other three corners. Now for the splines that are going to fit perfectly into this groove, find yourself a piece of scrap material that is at least 8 inches long and 1 inch wide and 1.5 inches deep. It can be bigger than this, but it's got to be at least these dimensions. It could be a darker, different species of wood. It could be the exact same species. It's up to you. Once you've found your material, take your dimension that is at least 1 inch and rip it into 2 half-inch pieces and throw away the rest. Now take your dimension that was at least 1.5 inches and set your rip fence such that you rip off a little bit from each piece and send them both through. Now watch this next bit. It's a clever tip from LTD Woodworks. Put both of your pieces against the rip fence and imagine how the one tight to the fence is going to pass by the blade again, but it's not going to change size. But the second piece, that's going to encounter the blade and it's going to lose a blade's width worth of material. Set up a feather board with gentle pressure on it to hold both pieces in place, back off, and then start up the blade and push slowly through until you're about 2/3 of the way through, and then stop. Because if you keep going, you might find your pieces start lifting up in a way that could be startling. You just want to go 2/3 of the way through and then stop the saw in the middle of this incomplete cut. What you're going to end up with is this piece of material minus the width of the saw blade with a little pusher at the end. Flip this piece around so that the flat side is against the fence with the pusher towards the blade. This gives you a little sled for your second piece to ride along against. Scoot your feather board in to maintain pressure on the next version of our 2-piece unit, and then push everything through together. And watch how now you are separating off a blade's width worth of material. This is your spline. And make sure, again, that you stop at about 2/3 of the way through, or things are going to get weird. For example, after 2/3 of the way through, the wood starts to bind, and adding additional pressure does force it through, but look how it peels off the blade at the end, because we're falling off the end of the feather board. And look how ridiculously close the push stick is getting to the start of the blade. None of this is necessary. Just sacrifice a bit of material rather than your equipment or yourself. Leave room between you and the blade. Just get to 2/3 of the way through and stop, power down the blade, and remove your material from there. This one little spline should be enough. Cut it into 4 pieces, get glue into the groove and onto both sides of the spline, and then insert it in until it bottoms out at the bottom of the groove. Do this for all 4 corners and let that glue dry. You want to leave it overnight before we come after it with a saw and a chisel. When the glue's dry, step on up to the bandsaw, turn it on, and keep the following ideas in mind. Keep your hands away from the blade by flipping your picture frame over so that you can always push the far side through the blade. And idea number 2, make sure that you only trim close to your frame and don't get so close that you risk scarring the frame with the blade. We're going to deal with the final trim with the hand chisel. All right, chisel basics number 1, try to keep the edge protected. A lot of work went into sharpening this edge, so dropping it on a concrete floor will destroy it. Concept number 2, you've got to secure your material. It's just too hard to hold on to this by hand. You need to put it in a vise. And once you've got it secured in a vise, resist the temptation to get your fingers in front of the blade of the chisel. These things are extremely sharp, and as it lets go, if it goes into your hand, you've got the potential to cut so deep that you can do nerve damage. So keep your fingers and hands on the back side, the handle side of the chisel at all times. As you get going, consider the depth of your cut. It might be tempting to try to get all the way down to the picture frame in one go. But if instead you shave off a less deep cut, you'll probably have greater success with the chisel. Work down slowly through your material. Then consider the direction of your approach. If I keep going in this direction towards the corner, I become more and more likely to blow out the end of my material. So consider flipping around and approaching your cut from the other side. From this direction, I am pushing back into the bulk of my material. Everything is better supported from this side. There is no risk of blowout. And don't be afraid of finding a bit of your picture frame material itself. That's how you know you have arrived at the plane of your picture frame. Once you have chiseled down all of your splines and sanded the picture frame to your heart's content, find your way to the paint booth and get some fume extraction going in this hood and apply a coat of oil to finish your frame. It is so satisfying to see this work come together for the first time. Unless you're like me and you accidentally made the picture frame completely the wrong size and you had to start over. Even if that's the case, eventually you will get to the finish line, and then all that's left is to drop in the glass, add the art, add the backing, and drive in some of these metal points to hold it all in place. Congrats on getting to here. Picture frames have a magical power to elevate a bit of art, a memory, a gift, something that you want to share with someone that you care about.